Hello, everybody. It is your host of the Jewish Adulting Podcast, Chedva Rose. And I'm here tonight with Rochel Ziman. Rochel is a licensed mental health therapist. She utilizes a lot of humor and some quirkiness while working with adults clients, which is over 23 years of age, achieving their goals to better their everyday lives. She utilizes her clinical and life experiences to support and guide individuals navigating medical challenges, severe mood disorders, and what she calls adulting 101. Rochel is well known in the Baltimore community for creating opportunities that fill in the gaps not yet met by local organizations. She has spearheaded a grief support group on an all women's theater group and has been a big advocate for Jewish Caring Network. Rochel uses her passion and creative talents to effect positive change for single, divorced, and widowed individuals. She treats any person she encounters with dignity and respect. Fun fact, Rochel was an only child until she was 9. She moved from Israel to Baltimore at age 10 and went skydiving when she was 25 and loves doing crossword puzzles. Now, what I love about that bio is that I ask all of my interviewees to please tell me something about themselves and maybe even get a little fun. They don't have to keep it clinical. They don't have to keep it to just their accomplishments. And most people do not take me up on that. But Rochel, you did. So thank you so much for that.
For sure.
And I also wanted to mention that that Rochel is making a 15-minute video consultation free for people who are in touch with her. And they can email contact@zimancounseling.com, which I will put in the episode notes. So if you want to be in touch with her for a consultation, you can do that. Now, let me just tell you a little story about how Rochel and I met recently.
Oh gosh.
Firstly, we went to a Shabbaton and we sat in the back seat together.
Retreat.
Shabbaton retreat, whatever.
Yeah.
And I will not go into the specifics of the Shabbaton, but I will say that car ride was really a combination of trauma bonding and like just getting to know each other very quickly. I think at the end we were holding hands and praying together. So it was really like it was very quick connection that we made. And that was when you told me about the work you were doing because you were working. And I said, oh, I just started this Jewish adulting podcast. And you said, oh, all I do is teach my clients how to do adulting because it's something that is such an issue with people from the trauma community. So this sparked my interest, and I said we're going to have you on my podcast. And here we are, a few months later. We're actually doing it.
Here we are.
Yeah, we are. Here we are. But I did want to tell my audience why I chose this topic. Unfortunately, there is a large segment of the population that has suffered trauma. And I'm going to ask you to define what that means shortly. But, if what we're saying is that there's obviously a correlation between having a traumatic past or traumatic incident or something that makes it difficult to do adulting. And I'll ask you to define what adulting means to you and to your clients. So I thought this would be a really good conversation to be having together. But before you answer any of my questions, I want to remind my audience to like, subscribe, share, follow, comment, rate, share. Did I mention like? Did I mention subscribe? All those things help with visibility for the podcast. And the more people who get to listen and enjoy, the more we could keep producing content. Okay, so going back
Wait,
to my
can I
question.
interrupt while
Yeah.
we're saying to remind people that this is not in replacement of therapy or medication. This is my perspective, our discussion. And
Yep.
you all, I do have clinical knowledge. You can't assume diagnosis or any information for your own mental health care from
Right.
this podcast, but it's a good jumping off point to
Right.
get you started.
Right. And it's also the same thing goes for any halachic
Right.
questions that you have. Never take my podcast as an authority because it's just the opinions and authority of the people who are sharing, but that's not necessarily the way that your Rav would skin or what your mental health professional will tell you to do. So thank you for bringing up that disclaimer as well.
Sure.
So first let's explain about what let's define a little bit of what trauma means, and then let's define adulting, and then let's talk about the intersection where this becomes a problem.
Okay, sure. So trauma is a scary word to a lot of people. Some people assume like, well, I don't have that. They have it worse than me. So I like, what I've learned, what I explain is there's big T, little t. Um, big T, what we're all familiar with. We've read about, we've watched movies, TV, we hear these traumatic stories. I like, the word traumatic, and that's pretty like intense things that um are more first person trauma, abuse, unfortunately, sexual trauma, childhood experiences. It could be being part of a war, stuff like that. Um, and the way that the DSM, which is our therapy Bible, don't ask me if I like that or not, but that's what we're still using. Basically, it has to affect a person in significant criteria. They have to have memories about it, has to affect them physiologically. They avoid certain areas, certain people. So there's actual clinical list of what constitute as trauma, which is this big T. But more so, I want to focus on little t, which is, not as intense trauma that you would explain to, you could totally tell when you meet someone. It's the little T's, which are, I like to describe as a bunch of little cuts over and over again, as opposed to one big slash. But it's this continuous small cuts over and over again, repetitive throughout life. And that does cause damage to ourselves, to our souls, to our bodies, to our minds. And most of us wouldn't consider ourselves, you know, PTSD or trauma because, oh, whatever. So yeah, like my parent was never home. I still had food. I still, went to school, but not having an adult around to model and guide you, that does cause little T's and potentially to big T's. So that's kind of the beginning of what I would say trauma is. And I know I'm not giving perfect examples, but it is something, would be best to talk to a therapist, psychiatrist to get clarity on that. You can also research it yourself, and I'm happy to, guide anyone if that would be helpful.
Okay.
Um,
Well,
so
I think that I've always thought of little t and big T as, besides for like, it's the difference between getting into a car accident that was like, that just made you more scared to drive, or getting into a car accident which made you scared to get in the car.
right,
Right? There was loss of life, there was loss of significant
correct,
pain and whatever. Like, whether a car accident, you walked out of it, you were totally fine, but now you're completely hyper vigilant about driving, or whether you're, it's in a home. It's really how it affects your behavior moving down the line. So
100%.
um, I that's how I think of little t, big T. But so I have other definitions myself, but I think you're right. It really depends on the person, and if they have a thought that they have suffered trauma, then they should really consult with a professional because likely they have.
And even if
Um,
you don't think you have, no offense to everyone, but you probably have, it might not affect you. It might not be clinically, a problem, but we've all dealt through things. We're Jewish, first of all. We live in 2024, just not being able to like get into my, business, can't talk in English. My like, all my IT issues now when I didn't study IT is constant trauma for me. But we have different levels. It's how it affects us, but it's good to like talk it through with even a friend or somebody. And if it's something that is affecting you in multiple areas of your life, then it's your version of trauma. It doesn't have to be what this definition of like intense trauma is. everybody experiences some level of it. It's just the question is, how distressing is it in your life?
Right. So that actually leads to the next part of this, which is how does trauma affect the brain and our ability to emotionally regulate?
So, first of all, our brain is constantly shifting, but it is you get a cold that'll affect your brain or how you process things, but having repetitive um traumas, challenges, neglect, or whatever you want to call it, or numerous car accidents, or just the car stopping short many, many times, our brain does readjust and kind of learns to, one of the methods is fright, flight, or freeze. Some people have, they get so scared they can't tolerate things, or they run away, they can't handle it, or they just freeze, they don't even know what to do. So the brain is constantly taking in our surrounding environments and incoming information or experiences, and it's training us to cope. So it might be saying, okay, you just need to shut down right now because this is too intense. And the brain or, your body, however physiological or mental, is protecting you at that time. So it was doing the right thing for you then. The question is, it's been 20 years. Should I still be, freezing when I hear a car honk?
Right,
So that's kind of is learning the difference of, are my reactions really appropriate for what's happening now around me? Or am I
right,
just reacting based on what my body and my mind are used to dealing with?
right. So so if this is the reaction that our brain and our emotions have when it's trying to cope with our little t's and our big t's,
Mhm.
so why do you think there's a correlation with specifically around adulting tasks? And let's define adulting first. How do you define adulting for your patients? Obviously everybody has a different definition.
Right. So for me, I mean, I deal with this. I think everyone I know deals with this, but I kept seeing, patients, clients, I like to call them clients, because they're consumers, um, come in and they were in this age range of 25 to 40-ish, and they hustled through school. They got into middle school and high school, and they were constantly told, get into a good college, and get that good job, and then. And a lot of these clients came and they hit those points where they got the good job. They have, stable finances. And again, I'm talking more non-Jewish right now. Um, and then they come and they realize they're extremely depressed or not motivated. They can't sit still, they have no motivation, and they don't understand why they're so depressed. And then they come and I literally would ask, okay, well, what are you working towards? And they're like, what do you mean? I was working to get to this. And I always ask, and then what? What are you waiting for? And they're like, I guess to retire. And I say, well, that's in 40 years if any of us are going to retire. Um, and I'm like, then what are you going to do? You're going to golf then? Is that going to be entertaining? And it's basically we spend most of the time in the beginning building, learning about hobbies, learning about volunteering, community, how to take care of ourselves, how to be in relationships. It's this focus our whole lives, even for us, is hustle, 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 get the grade, get the this, but who's really modeling healthy um living, relationships, self-love, motivation, time management? Yeah, some of us are given like threats about it, or maybe we're lucky to see healthy adults around us doing it, but a lot of people don't get that opportunity, and it's more like, you better do this or else. But that's what I mean by adulting, is that all these things that should be second nature technically as adults, but if you had no education about it or modeling, you get there and you're like, wait, I don't know how to do basic things. So that's kind of what I call adulting. I don't know if that answers your question the right way. That's my mindset behind it.
Right. So I guess the question that I have, and then the follow-up question to that question. So the question that I have is, why does trauma take a toll on our adulting, our ability to adult, is question number one. But
Okay.
question number two is that you made a you said a not a disclaimer, but you did a qualifier. You said I'm talking about the not Jewish world now. So what I'm so the follow-up question is there something about the Jewish influence or approach that mitigates some of this effect on adulting?
Okay, fair question. Do you mind asking the first question first so I can answer that one?
Yes. So the first question was, why does trauma have that impact on our ability to adult? What's the correlation?
Okay, so I'll answer that one first. Um, so when I'm talking to a lot of these clients about, what I call adulting 101, it's easier to develop the skills and to work through things when there's less or limited amount of trauma, because you don't have to work through all that and, cut out, the tumor. You're just building new skills, and it's easier to learn them, practice them, build them into second nature. Now you bring in any form of trauma, and again, there's different levels. Then you can't just teach new skills and practice them. You have to really, really start by gently navigating so many different aspects, because they want to do better and feel better, but they also need to kind of navigate their history or their past, but they might not be ready. So it's really, a dance of, sometimes you have to wait for a long time before you can address their past, of the whys and how we've gotten here. And so it is much more detailed, complicated path to figure out how to deal with things, how to learn new skills, how to feel better about ourselves, be more motivated. So it's kind of, you have to be putting on many hats to navigate that.
Is it is it possible that what I know of trauma, and I know a little bit, one of the things I know about trauma is that coping mechanisms are developed to help get through the trauma itself. And then those coping mechanisms no longer serve us or help us. And then we have to develop new coping skills. And at that point, we're really at a loss because we were developing coping skills to survive through the trauma.
Correct.
And now that isn't working anymore. That's, you know, what, what do you know or can you say about, these coping mechanisms that are developed initially and then need to be, I guess, recalibrated?
Like we said already, the, fright, flight, or freeze, those are common coping mechanisms. Some have more severe, some have less, but it could be, not talking about your feelings or just shutting it down where you don't even feel anything. It could be um, you, things that are unhealthy, like drugs or alcohol or food. We have a lot of things that we've coped. It could be, talking to the wrong kind of people or not talking, all those things. And I say, like, we developed them when we needed them, and that was a success, because that's what kept us alive in that point of time. And what did we know at 4 years old of how to navigate a trauma? But you're here now. That means you did a pretty good job at getting through certain things. Whether it will help you forever, possibly not, but it was a skill that your mind and body were able to help you with at the time. The question is now, is it really helping or is it hurting more?
Right.
So the other challenge with, yes, we need to learn new coping mechanisms is, but do you take away the ones you've had all your life and then start inputting the new ones? Do you keep the old ones and learn the new ones? It's, how do you navigate it and practice when you're like, I don't want to let my guard down. If I hear such and such and it reminds me of something, I'm gonna have no, armor to navigate it. So it's a really unique person by person situation and plan. And it's kind of figuring it out as you go, a dance of like, this might work. Okay, I step back. This might not work. Oh, I see that that's not. So it's very personalized, not one size fits all.
Right. And I could see that if someone has a coping mechanism, even if it's not serving them anymore, that it could almost be a security blanket of like, I don't want to let go of this coping mechanism because I can't envision a world where I'm not using this. So I
Correct.
can
And I have a
see,
client, she said this, I think a few weeks ago. She said, well, I don't know that I want to get better. And
Right,
and I found that to be so enlightening. I mean, I think I've thought of that and I've heard it in so many words, but it was so direct of she's really, been putting in the work and she's really not felt like happy, or she's been like not able to leave her house, very, very miserable for a long, long time. And we're hitting that point where we're slowly getting over that hump, and she's very scared because she doesn't know what this world looks like and what all of a sudden she's going to have to do. She's for so long been so miserable, hating her body, hating everything, being, feeling shame and guilt. And now it's lessened, and she almost feels off worse right now of this potential, like, well, what does all of that look like? What do I do? Who am I? So
right,
it's it's not a like A equals B equals C, unfortunately.
right. So going to the other question that I asked, which is, does being Jewish uh mitigate any of this sort of, adulting component where, because even people who are Jewish who do have trauma, and we know, I mean, right now we're living in there's the generation, we have the generational trauma from the Holocaust, we have trauma from, Israel, we have, there's besides for individual traumas that happen, right? We're talking right now on a communal level, but
Right.
and as a Jewish nation, the amount of trauma that we had to go through. I mean, the Tanakh is just a series of trauma, and and overcoming these traumas and becoming the person that Hashem wanted us to become. Was Do you think that being Jewish uh, helps these coping skills and helps overcome some of this um, reticence to let go of those coping mechanisms? Like, what does it play a part?
Let me think before I answer. I think that it is both directions, and obviously because I grew up Jewish, Orthodox, and it's, kind of my own biases as well, is the things that I find, the reason I said this is my non-Jewish clients versus my Jewish clients is um having community, or even the layout of how like the mindset is. And again, I'm not saying every single person or every single type of Judaism, but from what I've witnessed, and even my not my clients who weren't really as religious, it's so interesting how this there is something to be said about the traditions passed on, or even the positive mindsets. I was talking today with a Jewish non-religious client who was saying, like, why do they need a law or talk about being a good Samaritan? Like, isn't that obvious? And it's like how we were raised. And I'm like, 100%. Like, you don't have to tell us not to covet your neighbor's wife. It's like, well, duh. Like, but this is how we're raised, and it is in our DNA. So, and again, I can't speak for everybody. There's plenty of people that would be like, well, I never knew any of that stuff. But it's if you have somewhat of a healthier, upbringing and family life, then certain things that you didn't learn, you can reach out. You could show up to Chabad anywhere in the world. You have that comfort of like, okay, I can get help if needed. Are we going to take it? Do we know of all those resources? Not necessarily, but for me, from my perspective and personal experience, that if I was stranded anywhere in downtown Baltimore, I could call any rabbi, even ones that don't know me or I don't never spoke to, and they would come pick me up, or they would send someone to get me. I find that knowledge is so helpful, and that's one example. I have clients, they never go out, non-Jewish clients, they never go out on a date with their spouse. And I'm like, why not? And they're like, well, where would we find a babysitter? And that I never thought of that, because I could easily find a babysitter and maybe know who they are, have 15 references, or even a doctor. They're like, well, where would I? It we're very lucky with that we could have a network to find a doctor. You had something bothering your eye, you could show up to any from eye doctor in town on Shabbos, and they would 100% help you. That is something that we're so lucky to have, that we can navigate certain traumas differently. Does that?
Right. So that sounds like what you're saying is that we have, as a Jewish people, specific support system in place that is a key component of feeling connected, of feeling like someone has you, someone understands you in a way that someone who's not connected to a religion or a community would feel isolated and possibly have difficulty with overcoming their trauma, but that this particular component is one of the effective strategies towards um, towards getting better, towards healing.
Yeah, and also the resources and you need medication, you need a therapist, you need to figure out how to pay your taxes, you need any sort of guidance. Again, will we all take it? Do we all know who those people are? No, but we could ask one person would direct us. And you could say like, okay, I'm having adulting challenges of finances or figuring out like, loans or whatever it is. We have the access to resources of people that have already established things and know how to guide us, but we have options to even take advantage of where that isn't so simple in communities or worlds where they don't even know a single neighbor. It's not community based anymore. It's very individual. They don't know their coworkers, their friends. They don't let their friends hang out with anybody because they don't know them. So we do have that, you know,
Uh-huh.
that experience. And to me, that is a huge part of us being able to deal with traumas, big T, little t, and navigate through life.
Right. And as you were speaking, I was also thinking about, you mentioned role models, where we don't have some people who experience trauma don't have, good role models for what an adult or what perseverance or what resilience, or what, paying your taxes or, all these different things that come as part of being an adult looks like. But when I think about the avos and the imahos, or even I just did an interview with Shoshana Kruger, and her mother um, was a Holocaust survivor, and she had this legacy, and it wasn't even a spoken legacy. Like, she didn't talk to her kids about her being in the Holocaust till they were in high school, but the way she lived her life was such a model for them of like, what, when things are difficult, what do you need to do? You need to find a place to live, and you
Right.
gotta reach out to the people in the community, and they help set you up, and then they help find you jobs, and they are responsible for each other. And there's just such a, I know for myself, like my favorite, imahos, or my favorite avos, like my favorite role models in the Tanakh are people who I can relate to, and I can relate to them because I feel like, oh, look, they had a hard childhood, and despite
Yep.
this, they opened their homes up to all these guests, and they recognized that there was a one God, and they spread the message of love. And they they kept they protected people who were wicked, because um that do unto others. Like, there was so many different lessons that we learned, that if you pay attention,
Right.
that you could have modeling. And that's kind of one of the things I was thinking about as we were talking about the resources in the community. But there are where we can stand on the shoulders of trauma victims before us and say they were able to overcome, some bad big T's and
Right.
little T's.
Right. So
Uh,
it's interesting you just brought that up because you had asked like how does being from or Jewish affect trauma or
right.
we were sharing kind of the positives of resources, community, um and I was also wanted to share that that is also somewhat negative where we're carrying previous generations trauma. It's generational, use that word. We're, it's kind of in our DNA, especially as we're seeing now with what's going on in the world. It doesn't feel brand new to a lot of us, even if some of us have not experienced it before. It feels like, I don't know, want to use the word destiny, but it feels like, yeah, this is everything we learned our whole lives, and generation after generation, it's gonna happen. And it's a little scary to be able to say that we're living through things and just having that, like, I don't know if you grew up like this, but the fear of the Holocaust and that, and then the silence, and then
Right.
what,
So I had somebody who called me who wanted to do an interview about, teaching our children how to overcome anti-Semitism or how to like cope with anti-Semitism. And one of the arguments that she made was, there's not enough Holocaust education.
okay,
So I argued with her. I mean, this wasn't during our interview, this was our preliminary call, which I always have first. And I said to her, well, do you think it's positive to have, tell the thousands of disenfranchised Jewish children that, you know, be proud, you survived the Holocaust?
hmm,
Like, is that what the message is that you want to have? Um, because I think that is a big part of one of the that like you're saying is it can be negative also. There are people who are like, I don't want to talk about the Holocaust all the time. That's all Judaism is. It's the
right,
surviving one thing after another. And I think that obviously the answer to that, in my opinion, is that she wanted to make the point that, yeah, but look at all the people who fought back. It's not just, we didn't all just let ourselves be led to the slaughter. There was all these people who fought back. And I didn't really like that answer. For me is that you need to have a balanced view of Judaism,
right. That
that
word balanced,
for all the Holocaust that there were, look at all the times that we were victorious, and or we were smart, and we were funny, and we were resourceful, and we came together as a community, and we created love and family. And you can have pride in so many other parts. It's almost like a superficial thing to focus on the Holocaust because there's so much good. But if the only thing that you're teaching is the Holocaust, I
right.
I I would venture to say that that is going to create more more trauma to the disenfranchised Jewish youth than
And
helping.
also how much we have to look at each age, each emotional, situation, and it's changing as generations continue. What used to be able to be told to kids, our parents' age, which I don't know if it was a good idea then, but
Yeah,
it was a simpler world, and also there were Holocaust survivors everywhere. So
right,
it was learn how to be respectful, how to, treat and behave in the community and give respect. Most kids nowadays will probably have never met any Holocaust survivor.
right,
I mean, none of my grandparents were in the Holocaust. They were all born in America. And I'm not super young, but it's just how my family worked out.
right,
But do we talk about the Spanish Revolution? Do we talk about all the other historical things that we've been through? There's only so much you can pile on kids to understand and carry, but
right,
we have to do within reason to show that, like, yes, we're the Jewish people, and yes, this is somewhat of our path, and but yeah, we should also share the funny parts and the people who are dynamic and people, you know, created this or invented that, and throughout history that the first printing press, I think, was made by Jews to print like Svarim. That is like pretty
right.
amazing, you know.
Right. Well, there's a lot of accomplishments we could point to. I actually have a funny, kind of sad story to tell you,
Okay.
but it reminds me of this concept of like, this is part of our culture, is to, kind of deal with heavy topics early on.
Yeah.
And I remember, I'll never forget. I'm gonna quote him. But Ozzy Rosenblum and I both had sons in the same class. And I remember, I think it was pre 1A, I could be wrong, but Ozzy can correct me. And I don't remember, I think it was PTA. And Ozzy said, why is this a coloring page? And the coloring page was some war that was happening, and the kids got a coloring page, and they're coloring some war scene from you know from from the one of the partios. had some war. Let's say the war with Amalek. I have no idea. And maybe there's like a dead baby in the background and
Stop
killing
it.
animals. You know what I'm saying? Like it was something. I don't remember the exact details of the picture, but I remember Ozzy and I kind of looking at each other and being like what? Because I think people have become a little bit inured to this idea that as a from Jewish, community, we're going to share all of the biblical stories, regardless of whether it's really age appropriate. Because there was no such thing as like, I don't think nobody was filtering it. You just learned Tanakh, and that was it.
I don't know. Maybe I think they were because there are certain topics that people have never heard of till this day.
Mm. Well, I don't know what to say except that this idea of like our kids being used to us being at war,
Right.
and that we have a coloring page for pre 1A,
Right.
you
That's
know,
completely like inappropriate, but I guess
right,
we can all, not to say that anybody would think that is appropriate, but I feel like depends who you talk to.
right,
Everyone has a different viewpoint on what's appropriate or not. And
right.
so we're coming at it, obviously from more emotionally aware therapy attendees.
Hmm.
So we already view things in a different lens.
Right,
And just how you raise your kids, how you were raised, how, I believe the world should be, how I, interact with people is very much based on our own views and influences and experiences. And some people, like I could tell you some relatives of mine who'd be like, what's the big deal? It's a coloring page.
right,
And like, why are you making this a big deal? Like, you just have to make a big deal of everything. Like, I may have heard that once or twice in my life.
right. Well, um, I think I told my children like this is actually a scary picture. Because I would rather my child not be, completely not in touch with this reality, even if it's exposing it to them a little bit too early. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that was my approach then.
Right.
That if there was a difficult topic, I would call it a difficult topic. I
Right.
would,
So
I would
that
say,
is pretty amazing. And now think about the people who didn't get that explanation, or there were no adults, or an adult that mocked it and said, "Oh, what's the problem? Oh, look at that baby."
right,
That leads towards that like lifelong, like now viewpoint of certain things that's maybe desensitized or traumatized, but you don't have anyone to talk to about it.
right. Right. Now going into specific therapeutic approaches or interventions,
Mhm.
do you have any that you find particularly effective for people who are dealing with trauma and who are trying to rebuild an adulthood where they previously might not have had one before, or one that was working for them?
So I kind of don't like that question, even though it's technically the right question, because like I
Okay.
said before, I don't think there's any one way that works for every single person. And
Mm-hmm.
it's actually what I don't like about, the education that therapists receive or there's no one way. I believe in taking a little bit of everything and tailoring it to each person, because you could say like, oh, do child-centered work with someone, but they need to be hospitalized every time because they can't go there. It's not really beneficial. I
Mm.
it's really it's context. I actually use this example with my non-Jewish clients as well, and they laugh, but they don't get it. I say there's a magazine in my community called The Where, What, When. So I have adapted it to be the where, what, when, why, who, or something like that. And they're like, what? I'm like, context. I need to
Mm.
think about like who am I dealing with? Is this, me? Where am I? What is it? What's the topic? Right? Like break down each part of it, and it could be in any conversation with someone, it could be when I'm thinking about healing something from the past, and really look at it from a context base,
Mm-hmm.
or deciding, okay, like the one size fits all, I want to do dialectical behavior therapy. I'm like,
Right.
well, that's for you because you really want to be, or people say, I, heard on saw on TikTok about somatic therapy, and I really think we should do that. And I say, okay, how old was the person on TikTok? well, she's 15, but I say, okay, so you want to talk about the trauma you experienced from your mother as a little kid in your body? You want to like start feeling it? Oh, never mind.
Right. So it sounds like you have to set some realistic goals and expectations to help a patient with like their recovery journey. Um, and that is a very individualized
Correct.
process, that it's not something that you can just say, well, if you do IFS and
Five things,
EMDR
right?
and CBT
Exactly.
and DBT and then altogether in a year's time, you should be good to go.
I will
Um,
say one thing that I do start with every single person and I try with my own life, which I'll say, and I say this to everyone, like just because I suggest this or talk about it doesn't mean I'm good at it. It's everyone's life journey to figure out. So I'm not sure if you are familiar, which I'm sure you are, or your listeners, it's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
mhm.
which is actually my modality. And I've argued with many, many people about it because that is my main focus. And we do know this, like from
Well, why
Jewish.
don't you explain? I mean,
Okay,
it's basically psychology 101, but for
correct.
those of
But
you who
it's
did not take
actually
psychology 101, why don't you explain it?
okay. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is basically a triangle and it goes through the important things that we need to focus on in life before you can get to the top. So at the bottom um, is the widest area, and it's basically a physiological need. So it would be food, water, warmth, rest, and that is the first thing that you need to address before you can address anything. So let's say you have a student or a client, and they are coming in with dirty clothes all the time, or they drink a ton of coffee because they can't stay awake, right? Their breathing is very fast all the time. You can't address employment or friendship before you address hunger or, their breathing challenges. So a lot of times we like to jump and talk about, confidence or being an individual, but if someone is missing the basics of those physiological needs, they can't work on anything else and you're going to be hitting your head on the wall because they're not achieving. And we see that in the education system, we see that in a lot of issues. You can't focus on steps ahead before dealing with the foundation. So the first level, the bottom, is physiological needs. The second one is safety and security. So that would be health, employment. Once you deal with the bottom layer, physiological needs, you know that this is more stable. Now we can address safety and security. And we're going up the triangle, so it's getting a little smaller. The next one is love and belonging, would include friendship, family, intimacy, sense of connection. Again, a lot of us jump in, especially as a therapist. Okay, let's talk about, sense of connection or intimacy. But if you didn't address the basics of they don't have a stable place to live, that
Right.
you can't talk about intimacy. They can't pay their bills and they can't afford food. You can't talk about that kind of stuff because that's, yes, that's important, but they're struggling to eat. So
I,
we have
I
two two more parts of the triangle is self-esteem, which is confidence, achievement, respect of others, need to be a unique individual. And the top, which is the smallest to the point, is self-actualization. Sorry, I can never say that word right. Um, would be morality, creativity, spontaneity, acceptance, experience of purpose, meaning, and inner potential. And that a lot of times people are coming to therapy to deal with, you know, accepting who they are or self-esteem, relationships, but rarely do people come about the physiological needs. So that is my main focus, is starting at the bottom, and nobody likes it. They're like, what do you mean? I don't need, we work on sleep, we work on food, eating consistently throughout the day, lessening coffee and caffeine, having more water, and they're always like, "What?" But it literally, you cannot survive or work on anything else until you're having less, someone comes and they're having 15 cups of coffee and they want to talk about, I'm like, "No, we're going to start by having 14 and a half. One half is decaf." And I literally, that's like my main focus, and I spend so much time just getting people off caffeine or alcohol intake, and then we could start talking about relationships, confidence. So to me, yes, I take back there's no one size fits all, because to me that's a every single person need to even get anywhere the next step.
I actually, you're reminding me, I had a therapist that I didn't realize she was doing this. Like it makes sense that there is, a whole group of social workers and therapists that would have this modality. But I remember I'm one of these people who's like, if I have an appointment for therapy, I gotta go. Like I hardly ever cancel. I'm like, I gotta go. I have so much to talk about. And so I remember there was one time where my mom was in the hospital, and it was, of course, it was overnight. Of course, it was for days on end. Of course, it was like, is she going to die? Isn't she? Of course, it
Mhm.
was everything was on me. I mean, it was just the regular stuff. And I had a therapy, and I had to like step away from the ICU to like go have therapy. And I said, okay, well, what should we talk about today?
Huh.
And she's like, well, have you slept?
Mm.
And I was like, no. She's like, what are you eating? I'm like, what's in the curriculum room? And she's like,
Wait,
okay.
those gross little pickles?
The Jello
Ugh.
and
And
the
there's always a challah roll.
there's always a challah roll, and there's deli from who knows when. But
They have good pastries though.
yeah, but that's not healthy.
Oh,
That's like
fuck.
calories that you're putting in your body.
Right. Fine, fine.
So she would say, oh, did you exercise? Did you take a walk? Did you go outside? And I said, what does this have to do with the fact that my mother might be dying and I haven't come to terms with it? And I don't have and I don't have all my coping mechanisms. And she would just not let up about, well, the first thing you're going to do is you told me you have a headache. Why didn't you take Tylenol? You need to take Tylenol. Let's stop right now. Do you have Tylenol? Where's the Tylenol? Get some water.
Right.
And she would like walk me through just basic self-care.
Yep.
And then she would say, okay, well, why don't you go to sleep now and we'll talk again tomorrow? And I'll be like, but we've only been talking for 15 minutes and we didn't get into like my stuff. And she's
Right.
like, oh, we got into it, girl. Like, you're
Right. That's the most important thing, to have someone say, when's the last time you slept, and go take
oh,
a nap,
right,
and giving you that like allowance to do that. And if you need a professional to say it, whatever. Like,
right.
that is the most important support, to say, like, you're drinking coffee during our session. Like, could you at least like wait?
Right. They're jumping off the walls. And how can your brain be possibly focusing
Right.
on
And
what
I'll
we're
say,
talking
when's the
about?
last time you ate? And how many people don't eat enough throughout the day. So that,
Right.
and yes, there's all these other forms of beliefs and intermittent fasting, which I'm not going to give my opinion, but you could obviously tell based on what I'm saying. But people will
Passive
say,
aggressively
well,
give me your opinion. Okay.
I don't know what you're talking about. But
Mhm.
when someone says, I get home from work and I'm angry and I hate everyone, I'm screaming and I'm like, when's the last time you eat? And they're like, well, I do really well not eating throughout the day. I just eat at night. And I'm like, oh, so you come home angry and tired and you have no energy for yourself, your family, but maybe you did need food throughout the day.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
we don't usually notice these, we don't really get these things until someone like knocks it over your head. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, I had more energy throughout the day. Oh my goodness.
Mm,
I can't
right.
even believe it.
Right. So I think just bringing this conversation full circle, I do think that based on this conversation, I would say that generally the emphasis on surviving a little T or a big T is like you said, survival. And we have fight, flight, or freeze. And
Correct.
and actually adulting doesn't come into that, like going to sleep on time and eating properly and exercising and not drinking caffeine. Then none of that has to do with surviving. So now we're using these maladaptive coping mechanisms to get through our day, and we're not functioning anymore. And I think that when you bring it down to that first hierarchy of need,
Right.
that saying, maybe when you were in middle of the car was spinning around on the freeway, you weren't thinking of like, did I get a glass of water today? When was the last time I went to the bathroom?
Right.
you were thinking like, stay alive, hold on, is my seatbelt on, like,
Right.
nobody hit me, like, those things were top of mind, and the other things sort of fell as a lower priority level, and that might have been somebody's whole childhood, or it might have been the whole traumatic incident that they didn't have to think about that lowest hierarchy of need, because even though it is the lowest hierarchy to survive, it's not in this way. It's a different type of survival. There's thriving, and then there's surviving, which is
Correct.
a whole nother conversation,
And
right?
there's like, if you were in an environment where no one put you to sleep because that was an unhealthy environment, that's a deeper thing. You have to like really learn new skills. It's not just like, oh, well, make sure you go to bed early. It's like a lifetime of learning, relearning behaviors that were ingrained in you.
Right, but you, like, if nobody put you to sleep and you stayed up till 1 and you woke up at 6 or at 7 because you had to go on this early school bus, you learn to get through the day being fatigued, and
Right.
you got the grades you got, and you survived,
Correct.
and you played how you played, you were grumpy how you were grumpy, you got through it, but you were not thriving, you were just surviving. You
Right.
got, so that's what I mean by, you can survive on little sleep, but will it be in your best interest? Will
Right.
it
And
help
how
you?
sustainable is it, and how
Right.
effective can you be in the other things you either need to accomplish or want to?
Right.
On
Right.
that, the like when we're teenagers and we sleep 2 hours, even though our parents, if we were lucky enough, said you need more sleep and you need to grow. And at the time you're like, uh-huh, what do they know? I feel fine.
Right.
Fast forward 20 years and I'm like, God, why didn't I sleep?
Right.
So many opportunities, but I also that was age appropriate. Um, but I now, struggle with sleeping. And it's who knows what caused what, but it is have what to say that sleep helps us like be healthy and grow and affect everything else positively, but it's one of the things that we are not skilled at.
Well, if you listen to any of my other podcasts, a few of the podcasts that I have coming out, which deal with burnout, which deal with health and wellness, which deal with memory issues,
Right.
which deal with, there's so many different topics, and the panacea to all of this is diet, exercise, sleeping
100%.
right, hydration. All
100%.
it's like every professional is, I'm like, okay, how many times am I going to get and host have an interviewee on here telling me
The
that
same
solve
mess,
this the same
isn't that
thing?
fascinating? And that's the bottom line to every single thing. I
Right.
could figure anything out in life if I had enough sleep.
Mm-hmm.
If I had enough water in the day. I feel awful at the end of the day if I really didn't have water. If we didn't have caffeine, I work on getting people caffeine earlier in the day, the cutoff zone. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
why? I'm like, well, what do you think? It doesn't affect me. I'm like, okay, how do you know? And then I'm like, you're extremely depressed and anxious and can't sit still. It has nothing to do with the caffeine you had at midnight.
Right. Now, I will ask you, because we are over our time, and
Okay,
what I mean by overtime is this: when these conversations are so fascinating, I end up staying on longer than
I know.
45 minutes. But I don't want our listeners to be like an hour long podcast.
About what? About going to sleep?
All right, right. So, but what I would say is, do you have an anecdote of a time that either somebody was extremely successful or extremely unsuccessful, either because for whatever reasons, whatever mitigating reasons, that would sort of help put any of this into perspective?
I think I'm not sure I understand your question.
Meaning that, you know we, as somebody who's been practicing for as long as you've been practicing,
Okay.
I expect that you have stories of somebody who overcame significant trauma to rebuild their adulting platform, whatever you want to call it, or somebody who fought the recovery, fought the strategies, fought the resistance, and was extremely unsuccessful.
Right.
right?
Oh,
Either
a
one of
lot.
those things to sort of show, to highlight and illustrate the the proof in the pudding type of scenario.
Sure. So, one person is coming to mind right now, had a very, very traumatic upbringing, um, lived in a very fancy, big property, but their family, sold horses and, would get it's kind of like a gambling world. Don't ask me, I don't really understand. So they would like buy a horse and then train it and then sell it for like $50,000. So they would basically live off of like occasionally this big surge of money. And then so he basically lived on this massive property, but like no adults were actually present because they were dealing with all this gambling. And his father was abusive and his mother was just involved in this horse betting. Don't ask, I can't explain more. And he, we've been working. He first came, and when I said the 15 cups of coffee, I don't even think I'm exaggerating. And he showed up like that. And I said, "When's the last time you ate?" And he couldn't tell me. He literally was living like, you know, on this high, like intense mode of like always moving, jumping, jumping. And we really cut down the coffee. We worked on him exercising more, pausing and breathing more, even listening to a song in the car before you open the door for work, really claiming back his own basic needs. And then we were able to start working on communication, on relationships. And just, I think it was last week, he actually said that he actually enjoyed being alone for a little bit, which he's never been able to stop and do something on his own because he always had to be like busy, involved, distracted. And it's really, I don't even have to ask about caffeine or alcohol or movement anymore. It's literally like, well, that's second nature now. Now we could work on the deeper stuff. So it is pretty cool to see with a lot of people once they buy into my weird style because they want to come and talk about their trauma and I say no, or they want to they want to feel better and I say, well, we'll talk in a year about if you feel better. And nobody likes that, but it's true. You have to put in the foundational work and then all
Mm,
of a sudden you're like, oh, I see what you're talking about.
mm.
So it is kind of awesome. And I always tell everyone, thank you for letting me part of your journey because it is a journey. And am I going to heal your trauma? No, but I'm going to help you learn to navigate it and not let it run the show. It's probably still going to be there. It's something you're going to have to carry the rest of your life, but does it have to like torture you, weigh you down, not let you leave the house? Maybe not.
Right, right. Wow. This has been such an interesting conversation. I say that a lot with my people,
I,
but
I should hope
but
you
it
pick.
but
I should
but
hope you pick people who are interesting.
yes, yes, I'm so grateful that you were able to join us, and we'll definitely have to have you on for another time, another talk.
For sure.
And thank you so much. And I'll make sure to post your contact information if anybody wants to have a free 15-minute video consultation with Rochel. They can go ahead and sign up for that. And I hope everyone has a good day.
Okay, thank you.
Bye bye.